Step back, you loitering parasite. This courthouse isn't your stage. Officer Dean Kessler shoved his forearm across Althea Rowe's path, blocking the entrance like he owned the building. His fingers jabbed the folder in her hands, bending the legal papers inside. Lawyers waiting in line slowed, watching as his voice climbed louder. Kessler's hand suddenly lashed out, his palm striking Althea's face so hard her head snapped sideways and the papers burst from her folder, scattering across the granite steps. Phones lifted instantly around them. "Every morning it's the same," he scoffed, like nothing had happened. "Some loudmouth wandering up here pretending they've got business in a courthouse." Althea didn't answer. Her grip tightened slightly on the remaining papers, her eyes calm and steady on his face. And Officer Dean Kessler had absolutely no idea he'd just slapped the judge who would be presiding over his case tomorrow morning. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Judge Althea Rowe approached the building, her sensible shoes clicking against the concrete. She held her coffee in one hand and tucked a worn leather case file under her arm, blending seamlessly into the stream of suits and briefcases flowing toward the entrance. Her gray blazer and dark slacks were deliberately understated, the kind of practical outfit that wouldn't draw attention. Officer Dean Kessler stood at his post, legs spread wide in an aggressive stance as he scanned the crowd. His eyes narrowed as they landed on Althea, his jaw tightening with barely concealed contempt. She noticed his hand drift to rest on his belt, inches from his weapon, a gesture meant to intimidate. As Althea reached the bottom of the steps, Kessler suddenly moved to block her path. "Hold it right there!" he barked, his voice carrying across the plaza. Several heads turned to watch. "Let's see some ID. You're wandering where you don't belong." The morning bustle quieted slightly as people slowed their pace, sensing the tension in the air. Althea remained still, her expression neutral as she studied Kessler's face. Her eyes flickered briefly to the security cameras mounted above the entrance, their black domes reflecting the morning light. She also noted the phones that had begun to emerge from pockets and purses around them, their cameras pointed in their direction. "I asked you for ID," Kessler said, his voice rising. He took another step closer, invading her personal space. "What's the matter? You deaf or something?" His lips curled into a sneer. "Or maybe you're just too important to follow basic security procedures." Althea maintained her composed stance, even as her mind catalogued every detail. Kessler's badge number clearly visible on his chest, the slight tremor in his right hand, the faint smell of cigarettes on his breath. She could see courthouse regulars in the crowd, attorneys she knew, courthouse staff, all watching with growing concern. "Pretty fancy briefcase for someone who looks like they should be serving the coffee instead of drinking it," Kessler mocked, his voice dripping with disdain. A few gasps emerged from the onlookers. More phones appeared, recording the confrontation. Without warning, Kessler's hand shot out, striking Althea across the face with enough force to snap her head to the side. Her coffee cup fell, dark liquid spreading across the concrete like spilled ink. The crowd collectively inhaled, the sound sharp in the morning air. Althea steadied herself, one hand rising to her stinging cheek. Her other hand kept a firm grip on her case file. She didn't step back, didn't raise her voice, didn't show any sign of fear or anger. Instead, she turned to a nearby courthouse guard, a young man she recognized from previous mornings. "Please call the court administrator," she said, her voice steady and clear. "And I'd appreciate it if those of you recording would stay for a few minutes. We may need your footage." The young guard nodded quickly and reached for his radio. Kessler's smirk grew wider, clearly pleased with himself. He crossed his arms over his chest, his stance relaxed and confident. To him, this was just another civilian put in their place, Another show of force to remind everyone who held the power here. "I've got better things to do than waste time with troublemakers," he announced to the crowd, as if giving a lecture. "When an officer asks for ID, you show it. Simple as that. Unless you've got something to hide?" His voice carried a threatening edge. The morning sun had climbed higher now, eliminating the shadows on the steps. In the harsh light, every detail stood in sharp relief. The red mark blooming on Althea's cheek, the spilled coffee staining the concrete, the circle of witnesses with their phones still recording. Althea straightened her blazer with deliberate care, her movements unhurried and precise. She looked directly into Kessler's eyes, her gaze unwavering. The crowd seemed to hold its breath, waiting. "Officer," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent plaza, "I'm Judge Rowe." The smugness drained from Kessler's face like water from a broken glass. His arms uncrossed slowly as the realization of what he'd done began to sink in. The crowd remained frozen, witnessing the moment his confidence crumbled into dawning horror. The security office felt cramped with its metal filing cabinets and outdated computer monitors lining the walls. Judge Althea Rowe sat perfectly straight in an uncomfortable chair, her hands folded on the scratched metal table. Across from her, Security Chief Tom Reddick shifted nervously in his seat, while Administrator Lila Barnes scribbled furiously in an incident report notebook. Through the glass partition, Officer Kessler paced the hallway like a caged animal, his earlier swagger replaced by barely concealed panic. His radio crackled occasionally with routine security calls, each sound making him flinch. "Let's begin with proper documentation," Althea said, her voice steady despite the angry red mark still visible on her cheek. "I want statements from every witness present, particularly those who recorded the incident. We'll need all security footage preserved immediately." Reddick nodded too quickly. "Of course, Your Honor. We'll get right on that." "Don't just get on it," Althea corrected him. "Do it now. Call your technical team while we're sitting here." Kessler's face appeared in the doorway, his complexion ashen. "Judge Rowe, if I could just explain—" "I didn't recognize you," he stammered. "It was a simple misidentification." "I would never—" "Please, close that door," Althea said to Barnes, who quickly complied. Kessler's face disappeared, but they could still see him pacing through the glass. Althea turned back to Reddick. "The footage, Chief. Make the call." Reddick picked up his desk phone, punching in numbers while sweat beaded on his forehead. The conversation was brief, and his expression grew increasingly troubled. "There seems to be an issue," he said carefully. "The exterior cameras experienced a brief loop during the incident." "A loop?" Althea's eyebrow raised slightly. "And the timing of this loop? It coincides exactly with the moment of physical contact." Barnes stopped writing, her pen hovering over the paper. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Officer Kessler's body camera footage?" Althea asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Reddick swallowed hard. "Listed as malfunctioning during his morning shift. Both cameras failed at the precise moment of assault," Althea stated, making sure Barnes recorded every word. "Please note the statistical improbability of such a coincidence." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the glass, they could see Mrs. Irene Lott, a regular courthouse volunteer in her 70s, being confronted by another uniformed officer. Mrs. Lott clutched her phone protectively while the officer loomed over her, speaking in low tones. Althea rose smoothly from her chair and opened the door. The officer's words carried clearly now. "Could be cited for obstruction, if you insist on hanging around. Might have to bring you in for questioning about interfering with official business." "Officer Martinez," Althea called out, causing both the officer and Mrs. Lott to turn. "Please state for the record why you're threatening a witness in an active investigation." Officer Martinez straightened, his hand automatically moving to his belt. "No threats, Your Honor. Just explaining procedure to—" "Mrs. Lott," Althea interrupted. "Please join us in the security office. Administrator Barnes will take your statement." She fixed Martinez with a steady gaze. "Officer Martinez, badge number 4471, correct? That will be all." Mrs. Lott hurried into the office while Martinez retreated down the hallway, speaking quietly into his radio. Within minutes, the courthouse began to buzz with new activity. "They're calling in the union lawyer," Barnes said, looking up from her phone. "Dane Hollis is on his way." Right on cue, Hollis appeared less than an hour later, his expensive suit and leather briefcase marking him as someone who never saw the rough side of law enforcement. His smile was practiced, professional, and completely insincere. "Judge Rowe," he said smoothly, "what an unfortunate situation. I'm sure we can clear up this confusion quickly." "There is no confusion, Mr. Hollis," Althea replied. "The incident is documented by multiple civilian witnesses." Hollis's smile didn't waver. Witness perception can be tricky. In high-stress situations, people often misinterpret protective actions as aggressive ones. Officer Kessler was simply performing his duty with perhaps a bit too much enthusiasm. "Enthusiasm doesn't explain tampered security footage," Althea noted. "Tampered is a strong word, Your Honor," Hollis countered. "Technical glitches happen. And really, this whole situation stems from a simple misunderstanding. Officer Kessler has an exemplary record." Althea opened her case file, scanning the day's docket. Her eyes stopped on an entry she hadn't noticed earlier. "Disciplinary hearing. Officer Dean Kessler. Excessive force complaint." She looked at the presiding judge's name assigned to the case, Judge Althea Rowe. The security office fell silent as she closed the file. Barnes had stopped writing, her pen frozen mid-word. Reddick stared at his desk phone as if willing it to ring. Through the glass, Kessler stood completely still, watching the scene unfold with growing dread. Hollis's careful smile flickered as he noticed Althea studying the docket, but he quickly recovered. He opened his mouth to speak, but Althea raised her hand slightly, cutting him off before he could begin spinning another narrative about confusion and misunderstandings. Judge Althea Rowe's chambers were bathed in the warm orange glow of late afternoon sunlight, streaming through tall windows. The wood-paneled walls seemed to absorb the light, creating an atmosphere that usually felt comforting. Today, however, the shadows seemed deeper, more ominous. Althea sat behind her desk, Officer Kessler's personnel file spread before her like a puzzle missing crucial pieces. Nia Caldwell, her trusted IT specialist, occupied the chair across from her, laptop balanced on her knees as her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard. "Something's not adding up," Althea said, holding up a document. 3 excessive force complaints filed in March. All disappeared by April. No hearing records, no dismissal paperwork, just gone. Nia nodded without looking up from her screen. "That's not the only thing that's vanished. I'm checking the internal logs now and—" She stopped abruptly, her brow furrowing. "That's weird. What did you find?" "This morning, about 20 minutes before your incident with Kessler, someone accessed the surveillance system using Administrator Barnes's security credentials." Althea leaned forward. "Barnes was in meetings all morning. I saw her calendar." "Exactly," Nia confirmed, turning her laptop to show Althea the screen. "Look at this access pattern. They didn't just view the feeds. They overwrote specific time segments. It's like they knew exactly what they were looking for. Or what they needed to hide," Althea added, picking up another document. "Here's a disciplinary report from last year, signed by Captain Marcus Weber. But Weber transferred to Seattle 8 months ago. The signature dates don't match up." "No, they don't." Althea spread out more papers. "And here's another oddity. 3 supervisors who signed off on Kessler's positive performance reviews. All of them left the department within weeks of filing these reports. Nia typed rapidly, pulling up more records. Judge, some of these electronic signatures, they're using old authentication codes, codes that should have been deactivated when those supervisors left. A soft knock interrupted their discussion. The door opened slightly, and Marta Velez, one of the senior courthouse clerks, slipped inside. Her usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by obvious anxiety. Her hands were clasped tightly together, and her eyes darted around the room. "Judge Rowe," she said quietly, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but—" She glanced meaningfully at Nia. "Anything you need to say can be said in front of Ms. Caldwell," Althea assured her. "We trust her completely." Marta nodded, then reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "This needs to be for your eyes only. Please, please read it when you're alone." Althea took the note, but didn't set it aside. "Marta, you're shaking. What's wrong?" The clerk moved closer to the desk, lowering her voice even further. "Officers have been searching offices after hours. They say they're doing security sweeps, but they're going through files, through computers." "Which officers?" Nia asked, her fingers poised over her keyboard. "Different ones each time. But Officer Kessler, he's always with them." Marta wrapped her arms around herself. "They spent 2 hours in records yesterday. When I came in this morning, files were out of order, drawers left open." Althea carefully unfolded the note, scanning its contents. Her expression remained neutral, but her grip on the paper tightened slightly. The note detailed the death of Gideon Pike, a government contractor found in his car 3 days ago. The official report called it a heart attack, but the note suggested otherwise. Pike had been investigating police contracts, following a trail of irregular payments and inflated budgets that led straight to the courthouse. "He tried to warn people," Marta whispered. "Pike came to the courthouse last week asking questions about vendor payments and security upgrades. The next day, his access badge was revoked. Then—" She didn't finish the sentence. "These documents Pike was looking for," Althea said carefully. "Do you know what they contained?" Marta shook her head. "But whatever they were, they scared someone. The night Pike died, someone used master keys to access the financial archives. The next morning, whole sections of contract files were just empty." Nia's typing grew more intense. "Judge, I'm seeing unauthorized access attempts in the archives database from that night. Someone tried to purge digital records too, but the backup system caught it. Can you recover what they tried to delete?" "Maybe, but—" Nia hesitated. "These attempts came from inside the building, from terminals that need special clearance to even access." Althea stood, gathering the scattered papers into a neat pile. "Marta, thank you for bringing this to my attention. For your safety, I think you should take a few personal days." "But the quarterly reports can wait," Althea finished firmly. "Go home. Stay there. I'll contact you when it's safe." After Marta left, Nia closed her laptop. "What do you want me to do?" "Start with those backup files. Work from home if you can. Don't let anyone know what you're looking for." The rest of the afternoon passed in tense silence as they carefully documented everything they'd found. When the sun finally set, casting long shadows across the chamber floor, Althea knew it was time to leave. The parking lot was nearly empty when she emerged from the building. Her sensible sedan sat alone under a flickering light, and something about it immediately caught her eye. As she drew closer, she saw it. A black ribbon, tied with precise care to her driver's side mirror. Across the street, a patrol car idled in the shadows. Even through the tinted windows, she could make out Officer Kessler's silhouette, watching her with the patient stillness of a predator. The streetlights cast long shadows through Althea's windows as she stepped into her darkened home. Her hand moved automatically to the alarm panel, fingers tapping in the code while her eyes swept across the familiar space. Nothing seemed disturbed, but the day's events had sharpened her awareness of details. She engaged 3 separate locks on the door, a habit from her days as a civil rights attorney that suddenly felt relevant again. Her case files made a soft thud as she set them on the kitchen table, the sound echoing in the quiet house. The kitchen clock read 9:47 p.m. Althea removed her jacket, draped it over a chair, and reached for the kettle. Tea wouldn't solve anything, but routine offered comfort, and she needed clarity to process everything she'd learned. Her phone buzzed just as she was measuring loose leaves into the strainer. Unknown number. Althea's hand hovered over the device for a moment before answering. "Hello?" Static crackled through the speaker, followed by a voice so digitally distorted it barely sounded human. "Judge Rowe. Smart people know when to let things go." Althea reached for a pen and notepad, her movements deliberate and calm. "Who is this?" "The complaint against Officer Kessler. Drop it. Or you'll lose more than just your career." The voice paused, artificial tones grating against her ear. "Accidents happen to stubborn people." "Is that a threat?" Althea asked, noting the exact time, 9:49 p.m., and the number sequence displayed on her phone. "It's advice. From someone who'd hate to see you end up like Pike." The line went dead. Althea studied her notes, then opened her contacts and scrolled to a number she hadn't used in months. Eli Mercer answered on the 3rd ring. "Judge Rowe?" He sounded surprised. "It's been a while." "I need information about Gideon Pike," she said, skipping pleasantries. "The contractor who died last week." A pause. "Interesting timing. I've been looking into that myself." Papers rustled in the background. "Official report says heart attack. But Pike was training for a marathon. Had a physical 2 weeks ago. Perfect health. What was he working on? Government contracts, mostly. Specifically, a series of massive security upgrades at state facilities." More rustling. Pike noticed something odd about the billing. Companies getting paid 3 times market rate for basic installations. Shell corporations winning bids without proper documentation. Althea moved to her window, keeping to the side of the frame. "Which facilities?" "Courthouses, police stations, anywhere handling sensitive records or evidence." Eli's voice lowered. Pike traced some of these companies back to offshore accounts. He was about to file a formal complaint with the state auditor. Then he died. "Yeah, then he died." Keys clicked as Eli typed. "But here's the thing. These contracts? They all got fast-tracked through the governor's office. No review, no competitive bidding. Just straight approval and immediate funding." Movement caught Althea's eye. A dark sedan had parked across the street, its headlights still burning. "How much money are we talking about?" "Initial estimate? At least $50 million over the past 18 months. But Pike thought that was just the surface." Eli paused again. "Judge, why are you asking about this now? I received some information today suggesting Pike's death wasn't natural." "From who?" "I can't say yet." Althea watched as a second set of headlights joined the first. "But I need everything you have on these contracts, especially anything connecting them to courthouse security operations. Give me a day to compile it safely. This isn't the kind of thing we should send electronically." "Agreed. And Eli? Be careful who you talk to about this." After ending the call, Althea remained at the window. Both vehicles sat motionless, their engines running despite the mild evening. She methodically switched off every light in the house, then returned to observe from behind the heavy curtains. Minutes stretched by. The cars remained, their presence too deliberate to be coincidental. Finally, after almost 15 minutes, they pulled away one after another, moving slowly down the street until they disappeared around the corner. Instead of relief, Althea felt a familiar surge of purpose. the same energy that had driven her through difficult cases and dangerous investigations in her earlier career. She returned to the kitchen table and opened a fresh manila folder. Working by the dim light above her stove, she began assembling documents. Her judge's credentials gave her access to public records that others might miss. She started with grant applications for courthouse security upgrades, cross-referencing them with contractor lists and payment schedules. Patterns emerged quickly. Companies with no previous experience suddenly winning million-dollar contracts. Budget items labeled as essential security measures with no detailed breakdowns. And through it all, a trail of approvals leading directly to the governor's office. In her notebook, Althea created a timeline: Pike's investigations, the missing complaints against Kessler, the conveniently malfunctioning cameras, the vanished supervisors who had signed suspicious documents. When she connected the dates, they formed a clear picture of systematic corruption. At the bottom of the page, she wrote a single line: "If intimidation starts this early, they're protecting something big." The parking garage's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Althea walked between the concrete pillars, her footsteps echoing in the early morning quiet. She checked her watch. 6:45 a.m. Most courthouse staff wouldn't arrive for another hour, which made this the safest time to meet. Nia Caldwell emerged from the maintenance hallway, a manila envelope clutched to her chest. Her eyes darted around the garage before she stepped forward to meet Althea. "I had to come in at 5 to pull these records without being noticed," Nia whispered, though they were alone. "Someone's been monitoring all database access." They moved deeper into the maintenance corridor, away from security cameras. The smell of cleaning supplies and old concrete surrounded them as Nia opened the envelope. "Look at this," she said, spreading printouts across an unused maintenance cart. "These are restricted access logs from yesterday morning. See the timestamp? 9:47 a.m., exactly when Officer Kessler confronted you." Althea studied the documents. Lines of code and access credentials filled the pages, but certain entries were highlighted in yellow. Someone used Security Supervisor Maddox's high-level credentials to access the surveillance system, Nia explained, pointing to specific lines. They didn't just view the footage, they overwrote it with a loop from earlier that morning. Very professional job, but they didn't count on backup logs recording the override. "Bryce Maddox," Althea said quietly. "I've seen that name before." Nia nodded, pulling out another document. "That's why I dug deeper. He sits on the State Security Advisory Board, appointed directly by Governor Sloan last year. The same board that approved all those expensive security upgrades Pike was investigating. The connection's too perfect to be coincidence." Althea carefully photographed each document with her phone. "We need to—" Footsteps echoed from the garage, and they quickly gathered the papers. Nia slipped them back into the envelope and pressed it into Althea's hands. "Be careful," she whispered. "They're watching everything now." They separated, Nia disappearing down the maintenance corridor, while Althea walked briskly toward the elevator. As the doors opened, she tucked the envelope into her briefcase between court calendars and routine motions. The elevator carried her to the third floor, where her courtroom waited. She'd barely stepped into the hallway when a familiar voice called out behind her. "Judge Rowe." Dane Hollis's expensive shoes clicked against the tile as he approached, legal papers already extended. "A moment of your time." Althea turned slowly, noting his perfectly pressed suit and practiced smile. "Mr. Hollis, court doesn't begin for another hour." "This couldn't wait." He thrust the documents forward. "A motion for your immediate recusal from Officer Kessler's disciplinary hearing, along with a formal complaint of professional misconduct." She accepted the papers without reaction, though her mind raced. The speed of the filing confirmed coordination. They'd prepared this response well before yesterday's incident. "The basis for these allegations?" she asked, scanning the first page. demonstrated bias against law enforcement. Hollis's smile didn't reach his eyes. Your hostile and unprofessional response to a simple security check yesterday morning created a clear conflict of interest. Officer Kessler cannot possibly receive a fair hearing under these circumstances. A simple security check that coincidentally wasn't captured on any working camera. Technical issues happen. He shrugged. But your behavior afterward, demanding investigations, harassing witnesses, pursuing personal vendettas, it's completely inappropriate for a sitting judge. Before Althea could respond, her phone vibrated. She held up one finger to pause Hollis and checked the screen. Unknown number. Judge Rowe? The voice was shaking. This is Irene Lott. From yesterday morning? I need to tell you something. Mrs. Lott, are you all right? No, I'm not all right. Irene's words tumbled out in panic. An officer came to my house before sunrise. He said if I testified about what happened, my teenage son might have trouble with the police. Said they could plant drugs in his car. Or worse. My husband's out of town, and I don't know what to do. Althea's grip tightened on her phone. Mrs. Lott, are you somewhere safe? I'm at my sister's house. But they knew where I lived, knew about my son's after-school schedule. They're watching us. I want you to stay there. Document everything that happened, including the officer's description. I'll have someone contact you shortly. After ending the call, Althea looked up to find Hollis watching her with calculated interest. Problems? He asked smoothly. Nothing I can't handle. She tucked the phone away and met his gaze. Was there anything else, Mr. Hollis? Just friendly advice. Some battles aren't worth fighting, Your Honor. Everyone has something to lose. The threat hung in the air between them. Althea simply nodded and turned toward her courtroom, leaving him in the hallway. Inside, she found Officer Kessler already seated in the gallery, his uniform pressed and badge gleaming. Their eyes met as she walked to the bench. He wore the same smirk from yesterday morning, confident in his protection. Althea took her seat and activated the courtroom recording system. She looked directly at Kessler as she spoke into the microphone. Let the record reflect that all attempts at witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice will be fully documented and submitted for investigation. This court will not be deterred by threats or coercion. She paused, her voice carrying clearly through the room. The integrity of our justice system depends on accountability, regardless of who seeks to undermine it. The afternoon sun beat down as Judge Althea Rowe guided her car away from the courthouse parking structure. Her mind churned over the morning's revelations, the access logs, the threats against Mrs. Lott, Hollis's thinly veiled warnings. She needed quiet time to review everything properly. The first sign something was wrong came at a red light. When she pressed the brake pedal, it felt softer than usual, with less resistance. Her years of driving the same vehicle had taught her its normal responses. This wasn't right. The pedal sank further toward the floor at the next stop sign. Althea's hands tightened on the steering wheel, her judicial calm masking the surge of adrenaline. She wasn't far from Mike's auto shop, owned by a mechanic she'd known for 15 years. Instead of continuing home, she carefully turned onto a side street, maintaining steady pressure on the increasingly unresponsive brake pedal. Her movements were measured and controlled as she pulled into the first empty parking lot she found. She reached for her phone, hands steady despite the implications of what she'd discovered. Mike, Judge Rowe here. I need you to come check my car immediately. Something's wrong with the brakes. 20 minutes later, Mike's tow truck pulled up beside her. The weathered mechanic slid under her car with a flashlight, then emerged with a grim expression that confirmed her suspicions. Judge, someone's cut your brake line, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Clean cut, too, not wear and tear. And they removed the secondary safety clip that would have prevented total failure. He shook his head. This was deliberate. You're lucky you noticed it early. Althea took photos of the damage from multiple angles, making sure the cut marks were clearly visible. I'll need detailed documentation of everything you find, Mike. This is evidence now. Already on it. He pulled out his phone and started taking his own pictures. I'm keeping the damaged parts safe, too. Nobody touches this but me. While Mike loaded her car onto the tow truck, Althea called a rideshare service. She wouldn't let this stop her from reviewing those documents. The attempt on her safety only proved she was getting closer to something important. At home, she spread the case files across her dining room table. Financial records, security logs, and construction permits created a paper trail she was determined to unravel. Hours passed as she made detailed notes, connecting seemingly unrelated details. Her phone buzzed at 7:30 p.m. The caller ID showed Eli Mercer. Judge Rowe, his gruff voice came through clearly. I've got something you need to see. Those courthouse renovation contracts? They're not what they seem. She put the phone on speaker and pulled out a fresh legal pad. Go on. I followed the money trail from those security upgrades last year. The main contractor, Summit Security Solutions, looks legitimate on paper. But they're routing payments through 3 shell companies before the cash lands in accounts connected to a private police training facility. Althea's pen moved quickly across the paper. Which facility? Blue Line Academy. It's registered to a trust managed by retired Captain Marcus Walsh, who just happens to sit on the same security advisory board as your friend Bryce Maddox. She remembered the access logs Nia had shown her that morning. The board that reports to Governor Sloan? Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. The Academy's providing specialized training services to courthouse security personnel. The invoices are vague, but the amounts are huge. We're talking millions funneled through this setup over the past 2 years. And Officer Kessler? Listed as an instructor at the Academy. He teaches their public space control courses twice a month. Paid very well for it, too. Althea's mind connected the pieces. So certain officers are protecting a financial pipeline that benefits both them and state officials. That's my read, Eli confirmed. Your assault wasn't random, Judge. You're presiding over cases that could expose this whole operation. I'm still digging, but wanted you to know what we're dealing with. Send me everything you have. And Eli, watch your back. They've already tried to silence one person investigating this. Gideon Pike, Eli said grimly. I know. I'm being careful. After ending the call, Althea stood to make tea, her thoughts organizing the new information. The financial scheme explained the aggressive response to her investigation. People willing to kill over exposed corruption wouldn't hesitate to threaten witnesses or tamper with evidence. It was nearly 10 p.m. when she returned home from picking up her dinner. The hallway to her apartment was quiet, the overhead lights casting familiar shadows, but something made her pause before reaching her door. There, partially visible beneath the doorway, was a white envelope she hadn't left. Althea approached cautiously, examining it without touching it. No markings or writing on the outside. Using a pen from her purse, she carefully flipped open the unsealed flap. Inside was a single photograph, clearly taken from a security camera inside the courthouse parking garage. It showed her car parked in her reserved space that morning, the angle suggesting it was captured from a restricted access area. The message was clear. They had eyes everywhere, access to secure areas, and weren't afraid to let her know it. But they'd miscalculated if they thought this would frighten her into backing down. Each threat, each attempt at intimidation, only proved how desperate they were to hide their corruption. Using evidence gloves from her briefcase, Althea carefully placed the envelope and photograph into a clear plastic bag. One more piece of evidence for the growing case file. One more reason to keep pushing until the truth came to light. The dining room table in Althea's apartment had become a war room of sorts, covered with stacks of documents, sticky notes, and legal pads filled with her precise handwriting. Her laptop displayed a spreadsheet of contractor names, while two phones sat on speaker mode. One connected to Nia Caldwell, the other to Eli Mercer. "Let's start with Summit Security Solutions," Althea said, shuffling through a stack of permits. They received the primary renovation contract worth $4.2 million last year. "I'm looking at their incorporation papers now." Nia's voice came through clearly. "Summit was founded 3 years ago, but they've already secured dozens of government contracts. Their business address matches a UPS store in the capital." Eli chimed in, papers rustling in the background. Classic shell company setup. They exist on paper to move money around. The real action happens through their subcontractors. Althea pulled out another document. Blue Line Academy appears repeatedly in these payment records. Training services, equipment purchases, facility rentals. "That's where it gets interesting," Nia said. The sound of rapid typing carried through the call. "I'm checking the routing numbers for payments made to their various vendor accounts. Judge, you need to see this. Sending screenshots now." Althea opened the incoming files on her laptop. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the banking details. "These numbers match." "Exactly," Nia confirmed. 5 different company names, all routing to the same account. Peak Security Consultants, Garrison Defense Systems, Aegis Training Solutions. They're all flowing into one place. "And look who signed off on the initial contracts," Eli added. "Emergency executive orders from Governor Sloan's office, bypassing normal procurement procedures." He claimed urgent security needs justified fast-tracking the approval process. Althea grabbed a fresh legal pad and began drawing connection lines between names. Bryce Maddox sits on the Security Advisory Board that recommended these contracts. He also controls courthouse surveillance access, as we saw with the tampered footage. The same board Captain Walsh chairs, Eli noted. Before retiring to run Blue Line Academy, Walsh oversaw specialized operations training for the department. His replacement? Dean Kessler's former supervisor. "The connections keep spiraling outward," Althea murmured, adding more lines to her diagram. "Each person we investigate leads to 3 more with suspicious links to these contracts." Nia's typing paused. "Judge, I found something in old personnel files. Before Maddox became security supervisor, he worked private security for one of Sloan's campaign donors, the same donor whose construction company later won the bid to renovate the courthouse parking structure. Where the cameras conveniently malfunction whenever they need something to disappear," Eli added darkly. Althea circled several names on her pad. "We have officers like Kessler acting as enforcers, supervisors like Maddox controlling access and evidence, shell companies moving money, and everything pointing back to decisions made in the governor's office. This is bigger than courthouse corruption," Nia said quietly. "They've built an entire shadow system for funneling state funds through law enforcement contracts. And anyone who threatens to expose it ends up silenced," Eli added. "Like Gideon Pike, when he started asking questions about the contracts." As if on cue, Althea's personal phone buzzed with an incoming text. The number was blocked, but the message was clear. "You're connecting dots that should stay disconnected. Ask Pike what happens to people who dig too deep. Oh wait, you can't. Stop now before someone else joins him." Althea studied the message without changing expression. Her voice remained steady as she read it aloud to Nia and Eli. "They're watching closely enough to know what we're investigating right now," Eli said. "Could be monitoring our calls." "Let them watch," Althea replied. "Each threat confirms we're on the right track." She powered off her phone and set it aside. Pike found something in these contracts that scared them enough to kill him. Something they're still desperate to keep hidden. "The timing fits," Nia observed. Pike's death came 3 days after he submitted public records requests for the emergency contract approvals, and 2 days before the first disbursement was scheduled to Blue Line Academy, Eli added. Whatever he discovered, they couldn't risk letting him expose it. Althea studied her growing diagram of connections. Pike was an experienced investigator. He would have documented everything he found. Those records are still out there somewhere. The courthouse clerk mentioned officers searching offices, Nia recalled. They haven't found what they're looking for yet. Which means we still have a chance to uncover what Pike discovered, Althea said. She turned off her phone completely and set it aside. Whatever got him killed is exactly what we need to expose this entire operation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse parking lot as Althea stepped out of her car, briefcase in hand. Her eyes immediately caught the dark sedan, a black Ford Fusion, idling 2 rows away, its tinted windows concealing the occupants. The exhaust curled lazily in the cool morning air. She made a point of not looking directly at it, instead checking her phone while mentally noting details. Virginia plates, fairly new model, government-style hubcaps, the kind of unremarkable vehicle favored by surveillance teams. "Morning, Your Honor," called a young attorney hurrying past with an armful of files. Althea nodded in greeting, using the moment to glance back at the sedan. Still running? Still watching? Inside the courthouse, she took the stairs instead of her usual elevator, emerging on a different floor before doubling back down another stairwell. Years of examining witness testimony had taught her to notice patterns, and she'd learned the value of unpredictability. Through her chamber windows an hour later, she spotted the same sedan cruising slowly past the front of the building. The vehicle's path seemed casual, but its timing was too precise. She jotted down the plate number in her notebook, adding it to her growing collection of evidence. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nia. Access logs show multiple late-night entries to record storage. Badge used belongs to retired officer. Althea replied carefully. Time to visit county records. Need to verify some dates. The records office sat 6 blocks away, housed in a bland brick building that held decades of property deeds, business licenses, and court transcripts. As Althea walked through its front doors, she glimpsed the black Fusion sliding into a spot across the street. Just need to review some incorporation papers, she told the clerk, picking a table with clear sight lines to the entrance. For the next 2 hours, she methodically worked through business registrations connected to the courthouse contracts, noting overlapping addresses and recurring names. Her phone vibrated again. Eli this time. Pike's secretary confirms he met with whistleblower week before death. No name, but said person worked courthouse security. Althea's mind raced. A security insider would have access to contract details, surveillance systems, and daily operations. Someone who saw the whole picture. Someone who reached out to Pike. The secretary at the records office approached her table. Judge Rowe? There's a gentleman asking if you're still here. Didn't give his name. Thank you, Althea replied calmly. I'll be leaving shortly. Through the window, she saw the black sedan still waiting. She gathered her notes unhurriedly, maintaining her usual composed demeanor. The weight of what Pike had uncovered was becoming clearer. Not just corruption, but an entire shadow system using police contracts to funnel money. The kind of scheme that powerful people would kill to protect. Walking back to her car, she heard the sedan's engine start up behind her. In her rearview mirror, she watched it maintain a steady 4-car distance as she turned onto Main Street. Amateur surveillance work. They were being obvious enough to intimidate, but not skilled enough to stay hidden. Althea took a series of random turns through downtown, confirming her tale. The sedan followed each time, dropping back slightly on wider streets but always remaining in sight. Their persistence suggested they wanted her to know she was being watched. Her phone lit up with another message from Nia. Found something big in contract audit trails. Need secure location to discuss. Instead of responding, Althea made a sudden decision. She swung her car onto Jefferson Avenue. the direct route to police headquarters. In her mirror, she saw the sedan hesitate at the intersection, clearly thrown by her change in direction. The massive concrete building that housed the police department loomed ahead, its parking lot filled with marked and unmarked vehicles. Althea drove straight toward the security gate with deliberate purpose. Behind her, the black Fusion abruptly swerved onto a side street and accelerated away. She allowed herself a small smile as she watched them retreat. Their hasty departure told her two things. They weren't actual police surveillance, and they definitely didn't want their presence documented by the station's security cameras. Althea pulled into a visitor spot and cut her engine, taking a moment to add more notes to her growing file. The sedan's plate number, its movements throughout the day, the timing of its appearance after her discoveries about the contracts. Each detail formed another piece of the larger puzzle. Her phone buzzed one final time. Eli again. Sources say Pike had file ready for FBI before he died. Never made the handoff. She stared at the message, thinking of Pike's final days. He'd gathered enough evidence to justify federal involvement. Found proof of something so damning that certain people chose murder over exposure. And now those same people were watching her build her own case, piece by piece. The surveillance was meant to frighten her into backing down. Instead, it confirmed she was on the right track. Pike had discovered something in those contracts that threatened the entire operation. Something worth killing for. Althea started her car again, ready to meet Nia and examine the audit trails. But first, she had a stop to make. Somewhere in this building, security footage would show a suspicious sedan following a judge's vehicle. One more piece of evidence for her growing collection. The afternoon sun cast her shadow long across the parking lot as she walked toward the police station entrance. Let them watch, she thought. Every move they made brought her closer to the truth Pike died trying to expose. Evening shadows crept across Judge Rowe's chambers as she and Nia hunched over stacks of courthouse records spread across her heavy oak desk. The building had grown quiet, most staff long gone for the day. Only the hum of the air conditioning and occasional footsteps in distant hallways broke the silence. "Look at this, Your Honor," Nia said, her finger tracing down a computerized log. "These evidence submissions from last month, they're marked as standard intake, but the routing codes are different." She pulled up another screen on her laptop, comparing numbers. They went through sealed processing without proper documentation. Althea leaned closer, studying the entries. How many cases are we talking about? At least 7 submissions in the 2 weeks before Pike's death. Nia's fingers flew across the keyboard. All processed through Officer Maddox's credentials, all redirected through non-standard channels. The same Maddox whose access was used to tamper with the security footage. Althea made careful notes, documenting each irregularity. "Can you pull the original submission forms?" "That's the thing. They're missing from the digital archive. I can see they existed because of the audit trail, but the actual documents are gone." Nia's face reflected the blue glow of her screen. Someone's cleaned house. Althea's phone buzzed, Eli Mercer's number lighting up the display. "Mercer, what do you have?" His voice carried urgency. "Judge, there's a situation at 1247 Maple Street. Fire department just got called out. The address belongs to Sandra Torres. She was Pike's contact at the courthouse contractor's office. The one he met with before he died? Same person. She'd been trying to reach me about some financial records, but wouldn't give details over the phone. Said she had physical documents to share." Papers rustled on Eli's end. "Now her car's on fire, and patrol units are blocking access to the whole block." Althea grabbed her coat. "I'm heading there now. Keep monitoring emergency channels." "Be careful," Nia called as Althea strode toward the door. That sedan might still be watching. The streets were mostly empty as Althea drove toward Maple, taking an indirect route out of habit. She killed her headlights a block away from the address, parking behind a row of trees. Orange flames reflected off nearby windows, casting twisted shadows across the pavement. She raised her phone, activating the camera's zoom function. Through the lens, she could see firefighters battling the blaze, consuming what looked like a late-model Toyota. The fire's intensity suggested an accelerant. This was no accident. Police cruisers formed a perimeter, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. Officers kept curious neighbors back, their movements practiced and controlled. Among them stood Dean Kessler, his posture relaxed as he chatted with another officer. He showed none of the urgency normally displayed at an active crime scene. Althea's camera clicked rapidly, capturing Kessler's presence and documenting the timestamps. His casual demeanor felt staged, like he was establishing an alibi by being visibly present. She zoomed in closer, noting how he positioned himself to watch the fire's destruction while maintaining a facade of professional disinterest. The flames devoured the vehicle's interior, ensuring any documents inside would be reduced to ash. Althea thought of Pike's final days, piecing together evidence that got him killed. Now Torres's car was burning, destroying what might have been crucial evidence. The pattern was clear: systematic elimination of anything that could expose the truth. After 30 minutes, the fire began to die down. Kessler remained in position, occasionally speaking into his radio while maintaining his relaxed stance. He knew exactly what this fire meant, Althea realized. His presence wasn't coincidence, it was confirmation. She took a final set of photos before slipping away from the scene. The drive home was tense, her mind racing through connections. Pike discovers financial irregularities. He contacts Torres. Both end up silenced, one through violence, one through calculated destruction. The parking lot at her apartment complex was quiet when she arrived. She climbed the stairs to her third-floor unit, keys ready. But something made her pause at her door. The deadbolt was engaged, exactly as she'd left it, but the door itself sat slightly ajar, perhaps a quarter-inch of space visible between door and frame. Althea stepped back, examining the entrance. No obvious damage to the lock or wood. A professional job, meant to send another message. She pulled out her phone and began documenting, photographing the door position, and taking careful notes. Inside, the apartment appeared undisturbed at first glance. But Althea's methodical nature had served her well. She knew exactly how she'd left things. The stack of case files on her dining table had been shifted slightly to the left. Her laptop remained closed, but the power light indicated it had recently been in use. She didn't touch anything, continuing to photograph the subtle signs of intrusion. The message was clear. They could access her space at will, examine her evidence, monitor her progress. But they'd wanted her to know they'd been there. Another attempted intimidation, like the black ribbon on her car mirror and the threatening phone calls. The intruders had likely copied her files, photographed her notes. They now knew exactly what evidence she'd gathered about Pike's death, the financial irregularities, and Kessler's involvement. Yet they'd left everything in place, choosing psychological pressure over outright theft. Morning sunlight streamed through the administration office windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Administrator Lila Barnes sat rigidly behind her desk, flanked by state investigator Marcus Walsh and union lawyer Dane Hollis. The room felt charged with tension as they waited for Judge Rowe to arrive. Althea entered precisely on time, her expression neutral as she took in the formal arrangement of the room. She noticed how Hollis had positioned himself closest to Barnes's desk, already establishing dominance over the space. "Judge Rowe," Barnes began, her voice carefully measured. "Please, have a seat." Althea settled into the chair directly across from Barnes, maintaining perfect posture. Walsh cleared his throat and pulled out an official-looking document from his briefcase. "Judge Rowe, this is a notice of temporary administrative suspension," Walsh stated, sliding the papers across the desk. Effective immediately, pending review of serious misconduct allegations. Hollis leaned forward, his expensive suit creasing at the shoulders. Multiple complaints have been filed regarding your handling of sensitive matters, particularly concerning law enforcement personnel. I see. Althea's voice remained steady as she examined the document. The allegations seem remarkably non-specific. Could you clarify the exact nature of this alleged misconduct? There are concerns about bias, Barnes replied, avoiding direct eye contact. Questions about your objectivity in cases involving police officers, particularly regarding Officer Kessler's upcoming disciplinary hearing, Hollis added, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Given recent interactions, Althea carefully read each page, noting dates and reference numbers. I noticed these complaints were all filed within the last 24 hours. Rather swift coordination. Walsh shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The timing is irrelevant. The allegations are serious enough to warrant immediate action. I'll need complete copies of all supporting documentation, Althea stated, including the original complaints, witness statements, and any evidence cited in these claims. Those materials are still being processed, Hollis interjected smoothly. The important thing is compliance with the suspension order. Interesting that the supporting evidence isn't available, yet the suspension is already prepared and signed. Althea made a note in her portfolio. When can I expect those materials to be provided? Barnes glanced at Hollis before responding. We'll have them sent to your office as soon as they're properly formatted. My office that I'm now suspended from accessing? Althea raised an eyebrow. Perhaps you could send them to my home address, though that seems to have quite a bit of unofficial traffic lately. Hollis's smile tightened. Any suggestion of impropriety in this process will only compound the existing concerns, Judge Rowe. Noting facts isn't suggesting impropriety, Mr. Hollis. It's what judges do. Althea stood, gathering her belongings. I trust you'll have my complete case files and personal materials delivered to my home by end of day? Of course, Barnes replied quickly. Security will escort you to collect any immediate necessities from your chambers. How considerate. Althea moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. I'd like the names and badge numbers of the officers who processed Ms. Torres's vehicle fire scene last night. For my records. Hollis's face darkened slightly. That incident has no bearing on these proceedings. Everything has bearing, Mr. Hollis. That's why we document it. Althea exited the office, her heels clicking steadily against the tile floor. In the hallway, her phone vibrated. Eli Mercer's name flashed on the screen. She answered immediately, moving to a quiet alcove. Judge, Eli's voice was strained. We've got problems. 2 guys jumped me outside the county records office this morning. They took my phone and laptop. Althea's grip tightened on her phone. Are you hurt? Bruised ribs, split lip. Nothing broken. He coughed roughly. But they knew exactly what they were after. I was reviewing Pike's financial documents when they hit me. Did you get a look at them? Professionals. Moved like trained fighters. One had a tattoo. Looked military. Eli paused. They said to tell you that accidents happen to nosy people. Before Althea could respond, another call beeped through. Nia Caldwell. I have to take this, Eli. Get yourself checked out and lay low. She switched calls. Nia? They searched my apartment last night. Nia's voice shook slightly. Some kind of warrant about electronic evidence tied to courthouse security. They took my personal laptop and external drives. Did they show you the warrant? Flashed it quickly. Signed by Judge Marshall. Nia lowered her voice. But Marshall's been on medical leave for 2 weeks. I checked the logs myself yesterday. Althea processed this information. Are you safe? For now. But Judge, they're trying to erase everything we've found. The financial records, the security logs, Pike's evidence. They're sweeping it all away. Stay somewhere else tonight. Don't tell me where." Althea ended the call and walked to her car, mind racing through the morning's events. Inside the vehicle, she pulled out her recorder and spoke clearly. Timeline note. Less than 48 hours after discovering financial irregularities in courthouse contracts, coordinated actions taken to remove me from the bench, assault a journalist, and seize evidence from court staff. Scale of response indicates something far beyond Officer Kessler's misconduct case. Perpetrators are moving too fast, showing desperation. They're afraid of what we'll find if we keep looking. She tucked the recorder away, watching a patrol car cruise slowly past her parking spot. The escalation was telling. They weren't just protecting a single officer anymore. This was about something much bigger, something worth killing to keep hidden. The marble walls of Conference Room B muffled the afternoon bustle of the courthouse. Judge Marjorie Keene sat at the polished oak table, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she examined the documents spread before her. Afternoon sun slanted through the Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the evidence Althea had methodically arranged. "Start from the beginning," Judge Keene said, her pen poised over a legal pad. "Every detail matters." Althea began with the confrontation on the courthouse steps, describing Officer Kessler's aggressive behavior and the subsequent slap. The security footage disappeared within hours, a convenient loop in the system at the exact moment of assault. Judge Keene's pen moved steadily across the paper. "And the body camera?" "Listed as malfunctioning." Althea pulled out the technical report. "But here's where it gets interesting. The access logs show someone used security supervisor Bryce Maddox's credentials to alter the surveillance records." "Maddox?" Keene repeated, making a note. "The same Maddox who sits on the governor's security advisory board?" "Exactly." Althea laid out more documents. After that, the intimidation escalated quickly. A witness, Mrs. Irene Lott, received an early morning visit from officers threatening her family. My clerk discovered unusual patterns in courthouse renovation contracts. Then this appeared under my door. She placed the surveillance photo of her car in the courthouse garage on the table. Judge Keene studied it carefully, her expression grim. The next day, someone tampered with my brake line. Althea produced the mechanic's report and photographs. A clear attempt to stage an accident. Shortly after, we uncovered financial records showing suspicious payments through shell contractors connected to police security programs. Judge Keene adjusted her glasses. "These contractors, they're tied to state funding?" "Through emergency orders signed by Governor Sloan's office." Althea spread out the financial documents. The same day we found these connections, journalist Eli Mercer was assaulted, and his research on Gideon Pike's death was stolen. "Pike's death?" Keene said slowly. "The government contractor who died under suspicious circumstances? He was investigating police contracts and courthouse funding before he died." Althea pulled out more papers. "This morning, they suspended me on vague misconduct allegations. Meanwhile, officers executed a questionable warrant to search my clerk's apartment, signed by Judge Marshall, who's been on medical leave for 2 weeks. Judge Keene leaned back, studying the timeline she'd constructed. They're moving aggressively to contain something. The question is what? The scale of response suggests we're looking at systemic corruption, Althea said. Money flowing through courthouse renovation contracts, security grants, and law enforcement equipment purchases. Pike found something in those financial records that got him killed. You need federal intervention, Keene stated firmly. But we have to do this by the book. One procedural mistake, and they'll bury everything. I understand. Althea nodded. I need your word that if I find a legal trigger for federal jurisdiction, you'll help ensure it reaches the right authorities quietly. You have it. Judge Keene gathered the documents carefully. But be cautious, Althea. These people have already demonstrated they're willing to kill to protect whatever they're hiding. After the meeting, Althea drove home, taking an indirect route to shake any potential tales. Her house felt empty and exposed, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. At her dining room table, she spread out copies of sealed intake records from the courthouse filing system. Hours passed as she methodically reviewed submission procedures, looking for anomalies. Her eyes burned from strain, but she kept working until something caught her attention. An entry filed 3 days before Pike's death. On the surface, it appeared routine, a standard evidence submission for a minor criminal case. But as Althea examined the processing path, she noticed irregularities. The filing had bypassed normal staff review channels through a series of seemingly random technical exceptions. "Too perfect to be random," she muttered, tracing the document's path through the system. Pike had worked as a contractor evaluating courthouse technical systems. He would have known how to exploit procedural loopholes to hide information inside legitimate filings. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. Althea pulled out a fresh legal pad and began drafting a motion. She would need precise language to justify accessing the sealed submission through proper channels. One mistake would alert the wrong people before she could secure the evidence. Her pen moved steadily across the paper as she constructed the legal framework. Each word was carefully chosen to withstand scrutiny while revealing nothing about her true objective. The motion would appear routine, just another judge requesting access to case materials through standard procedures. Outside, a car door slammed. Althea didn't look up from her work, but her hand tightened slightly around her pen. She kept writing, maintaining the steady rhythm of someone focused solely on legal documentation. The motion had to be perfect. Whatever Pike had hidden in that sealed submission might be the key to exposing everything, if she could access it before they realized what she'd found. Darkness settled over Althea's dining room as she worked beneath the warm glow of her table lamp. Legal volumes lay open across the wooden surface, their pages marked with colored tabs. Her laptop screen cast a blue light across stacks of procedural guidelines and sealed filing regulations. She took another sip of cooling tea, her eyes scanning line after line of courthouse submission protocols. The motion had to be airtight. Any procedural flaw would give Hollis the opening he needed to bury Pike's evidence deeper into the system. "Section 47.3, she muttered, turning pages in a worn legal handbook. "Sealed submissions require documented judicial cause for review." Her pen moved steadily across the yellow pad as she crafted precise language justifying access to the mysterious filing. The grandfather clock in her hallway struck 9. She'd been working for hours, building a framework of legal citations and precedents. Each paragraph was carefully constructed to appear routine while creating a path to the hidden evidence. Althea reached for a transcript from Pike's previous court appearances. He had testified in several contract disputes involving courthouse technical systems. As she reviewed his statements, a pattern emerged in his responses about legal oaths. "I affirm my duty to preserve and protect." She underlined the phrase, noting how Pike had worked it into multiple answers despite the different contexts. The wording seemed deliberately placed, too specific to be coincidental. Her mind raced through possibilities. Pike knew the system inside out. He would have anticipated attempts to block access to whatever he'd hidden. The repeated phrase could be a marker, a way to identify the genuine evidence among decoy submissions. She opened her laptop, pulling up sealed filing procedures. If Pike had embedded a coded reference, it would need to satisfy normal documentation requirements while concealing its true purpose. The oath phrase might be the key to recognizing which submission contained the real evidence. A car drove past her house, headlights sweeping across the walls. Althea barely noticed, focused on weaving the legal arguments together. She knew Hollis would attack from multiple angles, questioning her objectivity, citing her suspension, claiming personal bias due to Kessler's assault. Her phone buzzed with an incoming email. Hollis had already filed 3 motions challenging her authority to request any case reviews. The timing confirmed her suspicions. They were watching her actions closely, ready to block any attempt to access sealed records. "Nice try, Dane," she said quietly, adding another paragraph to address judicial authority during administrative review. Her suspension didn't strip her of the right to examine case materials, especially those potentially relevant to ongoing investigations. She pulled up Pike's contract evaluation reports, studying his technical assessments of courthouse filing systems. His knowledge of the infrastructure would have shown him exactly how to slip evidence into the records without detection. The question was whether she could construct a legal basis for accessing it without revealing what she suspected. The motion grew steadily, each section building on established precedent while anticipating Hollis's likely counterarguments. She included references to judicial oversight responsibilities and cited cases supporting review authority even during administrative proceedings. Another car passed slowly outside. Althea glanced at her security camera feed, noting the vehicle's deliberate pace. They were watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. But she kept writing, maintaining the steady rhythm of someone focused solely on proper legal procedure. She returned to Pike's transcripts, examining the context around his repeated oath phrase. The pattern suggested he'd created a documentary trail, breadcrumbs that would only be visible to someone who knew where to look. The phrase itself might be meaningless, but its presence could mark the path to the real evidence. Her tea had gone cold, but she barely noticed. The motion was taking shape, each paragraph carefully crafted to withstand scrutiny while revealing nothing about her true objective. She included standard language about case review protocols and routine judicial oversight. Hollis would fight it, of course. She could almost hear his arguments about her supposed vendetta against Kessler. But she was building the motion on solid procedural ground, citing clear judicial authority that existed independent of any personal conflicts. The grandfather clock struck 10 as she refined the final paragraphs. Every word had to serve its purpose, while appearing unremarkable. One phrase too specific, one citation too pointed, and they would realize what she was really seeking. She was nearly finished when her phone screen lit up. A text message appeared from an unknown number. Her breath caught as she opened it to find a photo, clearly taken through her dining room window earlier that evening. The image showed her at the very table where she now sat, surrounded by legal books and documents. The message below the photo was simple: "Stop digging." Althea studied the image, noting the angle and distance. They'd been close, right outside her window, while she worked. But instead of fear, she felt a cold certainty. Their escalating threats revealed their desperation. Whatever Pike had hidden in that sealed submission had them terrified it would be found. She saved the threatening message with the others, documenting the time and number. Then she returned to her motion, checking each paragraph one final time. The legal framework was solid, built on established procedure rather than personal authority. Even Hollis would struggle to dismantle it without raising suspicions about why they fought so hard to block a routine review. Dawn painted the courthouse in pale orange light as Althea approached the concrete side entrance. The early hour meant few people were around, perfect for a discreet meeting. Judge Marjorie Keene stood waiting, her silver hair neatly styled, wearing a dark business suit. Beside her were 2 individuals Althea hadn't met before, a man and woman in conservative suits that practically screamed federal investigators. "Judge Rowe," Keene said warmly, though her expression remained serious, "this is Agent Rivera and Agent Miles from the FBI's Public Corruption Division." Agent Rivera, a woman with sharp eyes and an athletic build, stepped forward first. "We've reviewed your initial report, Your Honor. Very thorough documentation." "Indeed," added Agent Miles, a tall man with close-cropped gray hair, "particularly the pattern of surveillance, tampering, and witness intimidation." They moved inside to a small conference room where Althea spread out her carefully organized evidence files. The morning light filtered through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the table. "The threats escalated quickly after the assault," Althea explained, showing them the threatening text messages and photographs. "Too quickly for a simple misconduct case. They were clearly protecting something bigger." Agent Rivera studied the financial records linking Courthouse contracts to shell companies. "These payment patterns match other cases we've seen involving kickback schemes. The emergency approvals bypassed normal oversight. And here's the vehicle surveillance log," Althea continued, revealing detailed notes about the dark sedan that had followed her. "License plate, times, locations, all documented." Judge Keene examined the records of witness intimidation, her mouth set in a grim line. "Mrs. Lott's statement about the early morning threat is particularly concerning. Classic witness tampering." The door opened quietly, and Nia Caldwell slipped in, carrying a laptop and external drive. Her usual confident demeanor was tempered by clear exhaustion. She'd likely been up all night preparing the data. "I have the system logs you requested, Judge Rowe," Nia said, setting up the computer. "It took some doing, but I recovered the deleted access records." The agents leaned forward as Nia pulled up detailed logs showing activity under Bryce Maddox's security credentials. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the missing surveillance footage from the courthouse entrance. "See here," Nia pointed to specific entries. Maddox's login was used to access the video archive at 9:47 a.m., exactly when the assault occurred. The footage was overwritten with a loop from earlier that morning. Agent Miles took careful notes. "Can you verify these logs haven't been altered?" "Already done," Nia replied, pulling up authentication data. "I preserved the original system timestamps and digital signatures. The manipulation only affected the video files, not the access records themselves." Through the conference room's small window, Althea noticed Officer Dean Kessler strutting through the courthouse plaza. He moved with the same arrogant confidence he'd shown that first morning, clearly believing himself untouchable. His swagger spoke of a man who thought he had powerful protection. "Kessler's disciplinary hearing is scheduled for 2 o'clock, Althea noted, watching him disappear into the building. "He seems awfully relaxed for someone facing serious misconduct charges." "Because he expects them to disappear, like all the others," Judge Keene said grimly. "How many complaints vanished from his file again?" 7 in the past year alone," Althea answered. "All dismissed under unusual circumstances. The supervising officers who signed off on those dismissals are no longer employed here." Agent Rivera studied the sealed submission records. "Tell us more about this filing from Gideon Pike. Why do you believe it contains critical evidence?" Althea explained her discovery of Pike's repeated oath phrase and the unusual processing path of the submission. Pike knew courthouse systems inside out. He could have hidden evidence where only someone following specific markers would find it. "The timing fits," Agent Miles noted. "Pike submitted this just days before his death, and the processing irregularities suggest someone tried to bury it deeper in the system." Judge Keene reviewed Althea's motion for accessing the sealed submission. "The legal framework is solid. They'll have trouble blocking this without raising more red flags." Through another window, they could see Bryce Maddox entering the security office, his movements precise and controlled. Unlike Kessler's swagger, Maddox moved with the careful efficiency of someone who preferred to remain unnoticed. "We'll need eyes on the key players," Agent Rivera said, "especially during the hearing." "I can monitor security system activity from my office," Nia offered. "If anyone tries to access or alter records during the proceedings, we'll know immediately." The agents spent the next hour reviewing protocols for the upcoming hearing. They would maintain discreet observation positions while Judge Keene handled the court session. Everything had to appear routine to avoid tipping their hand. Judge Keene signed the order, authorizing review of the sealed submission, her signature flowing across the page with practiced ease. "We'll convene at 3 o'clock, after Kessler's disciplinary hearing. That should give us time to process all necessary documentation." Agent Miles secured the evidence files in a reinforced briefcase, while Agent Rivera coordinated with their surveillance team via text. The pieces were in place, but they all knew the real challenge lay ahead. "Remember," Judge Keene cautioned as they prepared to disperse, "maintain normal routines. Anyone watching for unusual activity needs to see business as usual." They left the conference room individually, spacing their departures to avoid drawing attention. Althea was last to exit, carrying only her regular case files. To any observer, she appeared to be simply preparing for another day in court. The main courtroom buzzed with tension as people packed the wooden benches. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Judge Marjorie Keene sat at the elevated bench, her presence commanding instant respect. Her steel-gray hair and black robes seemed to absorb the light, making her appear like a statue of justice personified. Althea Rose sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture straight and professional despite her suspended status. She wore a navy suit and carried herself with quiet dignity, refusing to show any sign that the past day's threats had affected her. Officer Dean Kessler lounged in his chair at the defense table, his police uniform pressed and gleaming with brass. His smirk suggested complete confidence in his immunity. Beside him, Union Attorney Dane Hollis arranged papers with practiced efficiency, occasionally whispering something that made Kessler nod and smile wider. Administrator Lila Barnes and Security Chief Tom Reddick sat in the first row, their expressions carefully neutral. Behind them, Bryce Maddox watched the proceedings with calculated detachment, his hands folded neatly in his lap. The security supervisor's face betrayed nothing, but his eyes constantly scanned the room. In the back row, partially hidden by shadow, sat Eli Mercer. The journalist's face showed dark bruising around his left eye, and he held himself stiffly, clearly still hurting from his recent assault. He balanced a small notebook on his knee, pen ready. "This hearing will come to order," Judge Keene announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "We are here to address multiple serious allegations, including assault, witness intimidation, and evidence tampering." Dane Hollis rose smoothly. "Your Honor, we continue to object to these proceedings. Judge Rowe's suspension clearly demonstrates her bias." "Objection noted," Keene interrupted firmly, "and overruled. Judge Rowe appears today as both complainant and witness to events directly relevant to this investigation." The courtroom deputy approached carrying a sealed evidence package in transparent plastic. "Evidence Package 47B, submitted by contractor Gideon Pike on April 15th, he announced formally. "Let the record show the seal is intact," Judge Keene stated. "Please read the chain of custody." As the deputy recited dates and signatures, Althea noticed Bryce Maddox's hand twitch slightly, the first crack in his composed facade. Kessler was still smirking, clearly unaware of the significance of Pike's submission. When called to testify, Althea approached the witness stand with measured steps. She felt the weight of every eye in the courtroom, but focused on delivering her testimony with precise clarity. "On Monday morning at approximately 9:45 a.m., I approached the courthouse entrance," she began. "Officer Kessler blocked my path and demanded identification in an aggressive manner." She described the assault in clinical detail. The mocking tone, the deliberate humiliation, the sudden slap that echoed off the courthouse columns. Her voice remained steady as she outlined the subsequent disappearance of surveillance footage and the suspicious access logs Nia had uncovered. Mrs. Irene Lott was prepared to testify about witnessing the assault. Althea continued, until an officer visited her home before dawn and threatened her family. Hollis jumped up. Objection! Hearsay! Mrs. Lott provided a sworn statement. Judge Keene replied, which has been entered into evidence. Continue, Judge Rowe. Althea described the cut brake lines, the threatening messages, the surveillance photos left at her home. With each revelation, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier. Even Kessler's smirk began to waver. A forensic technician wheeled in a secure computer station. The sealed package was carefully opened, revealing a standard black flash drive labeled with an ordinary court filing number. During my investigation, I discovered this drive likely contains evidence that Gideon Pike was trying to protect, Althea explained. When police searched Pike's apartment after his death, they found a note referencing a specific phrase he used during sworn testimony. The technician connected the drive. A password prompt appeared on the courtroom's large monitor. Althea provided the phrase, and for a moment, the room held its breath. The screen suddenly filled with spreadsheets, banking records, and detailed financial trails. Page after page showed money flowing through shell companies, linking courthouse security contracts directly to political donors and private accounts connected to Governor Sloan's inner circle. Kessler's face drained of color. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he shoved backward, turning toward the exit. But before he could take 2 steps, the heavy courtroom doors swung open. Agents Rivera and Miles stepped through, badges displayed, handcuffs glinting in the afternoon light. Kessler froze, his escape route blocked, as gasps and exclamations filled the courtroom. Bryce Maddox's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely, his face showing naked fear as he stared at the damning evidence displayed on the screen. Dane Hollis sat stunned, his legal papers forgotten, while Administrator Barnes pressed her hand to her mouth in shock. In the back row, Eli Mercer wrote furiously in his notebook, documenting every detail of the scene unfolding before him. The courthouse steps baked under the afternoon sun as a crowd gathered, drawn by the sudden arrival of federal vehicles and the buzz of breaking news. Television crews rushed to set up cameras while reporters pressed forward, their microphones extended like probing fingers. The same steps where Officer Kessler had assaulted Judge Rowe now became the stage for his public downfall. The heavy wooden doors burst open. 2 federal agents emerged first, flanking Officer Dean Kessler. His polished brass badge and crisp uniform now seemed like a costume, a facade stripped away by the steel handcuffs binding his wrists. His earlier smirk had vanished, replaced by a sickly pallor as cameras flashed and onlookers pointed. "Is this related to Gideon Pike's death?" a reporter shouted. Kessler kept his head down, shoulders hunched, as the agents guided him toward a waiting federal vehicle. His boots scraped against the same concrete where he'd stood guard so many mornings, intimidating countless civilians who never knew his true role in the corruption. Behind him came Bryce Maddox, also in handcuffs. The security supervisor's carefully maintained professional mask had crumbled, revealing naked fear as more federal agents led him down the steps. His eyes darted between the cameras and the growing crowd, perhaps realizing how many people were witnessing the exposure of his schemes. "Mr. Maddox, did you personally delete the surveillance footage?" someone called out. He flinched at the question, but said nothing as agents helped him into a separate vehicle. More officials emerged from the courthouse, carrying boxes of documents and computer equipment seized from security offices and administrative storage rooms. Eli Mercer stood among the press corps, his bruised face evident as he recorded everything on his phone. Despite his injuries, his eyes shone with fierce satisfaction. He'd already begun publishing the first verified details online, revealing how Kessler and others had systematically intimidated witnesses and tampered with evidence to protect their financial conspiracy. Sources confirm multiple officers were involved in silencing contractor Gideon Pike, Mercer dictated into his recorder, loud enough for nearby cameras to catch. Pike discovered illegal payments flowing through courthouse security contracts before his suspicious death. When Judge Rowe began investigating similar corruption, the same network of officers attempted to silence her through threats and sabotage. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as more details emerged. Courthouse employees gathered at windows, watching federal agents escort various officials to waiting vehicles. Among them was Administrator Barnes, not in handcuffs, but clearly under escort, as she was led to an unmarked car for questioning. Judge Marjorie Keene appeared at the courthouse entrance, her black robes flowing in the warm breeze. The crowd fell quiet as she approached a cluster of microphones. "The federal investigation is ongoing," she announced firmly. "However, I want to address one matter immediately. Judge Althea Rowe's temporary suspension is hereby lifted. Her actions throughout this ordeal demonstrated remarkable judicial restraint and meticulous attention to proper procedure, even while facing direct threats to her safety." Cameras swiveled to capture Althea standing quietly near the courthouse doors. She remained composed, her expression neutral as she watched the scene unfold. The same steps where Kessler had tried to humiliate her now witnessed his disgrace and the collapse of his protective network. More vehicles arrived carrying state investigators. They headed straight for government offices connected to Governor Sloan's administration, their badges glinting as they disappeared inside buildings. Word spread quickly that the investigation had expanded beyond the courthouse, reaching into state contracts and political donations. Documents revealed in today's hearing prove systematic corruption, Mercer continued reporting, his voice carrying across the crowd. Multiple shell companies were used to funnel courthouse security funds into private accounts. Officers like Dean Kessler acted as enforcers, using intimidation to protect the scheme. When Gideon Pike uncovered the evidence, they silenced him. When Judge Rowe began investigating, they tried the same tactics. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse facade as federal agents continued their work. Bystanders pointed phones at the procession of officials being questioned and evidence being collected. Social media exploded with images of Kessler and Maddox in handcuffs, their faces destined to become symbols of exposed corruption. Mrs. Irene Lott pushed through the crowd, tears in her eyes as she approached Judge Rowe. "I'm so sorry I couldn't testify," she said softly. "When that officer threatened my children—" "You have nothing to apologize for," Althea assured her. "Your safety was more important." The evidence spoke for itself. From the street below came the sound of sirens as more federal vehicles arrived. Teams of investigators streamed into various government buildings, carrying court orders and subpoenas. The corruption network that had seemed so powerful and untouchable that morning was now being dismantled piece by piece. Althea stood on the courthouse steps, watching it all unfold. The same steps where Kessler had tried to demonstrate his power now served as the stage for justice. His intimidation tactics, the threats, the sabotage attempts, none of it had succeeded in erasing the evidence she'd carefully gathered. The truth had emerged exactly where the cover-up began. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.